She thought she was swiping a cheap piece of costume jewelry from a frail grandmother. She never imagined that single act would trigger her very public undoing. This is the story of how I, a 71-year-old woman everyone overlooked, mastermind the collapse of my conniving daughter-in-law. My daughter-in-law just committed the error that would define her life. Exactly 1 hour ago, a text message flashed on my screen. Just borrowed your vintage ring for the gala, Nana. Hope that's all right. I typed back with a gentle smile. Enjoy yourself, sweetheart. But the moment I sent it, I was already calling my attorney, Frank Miller, and instructing him, initiate a theft claim for catalog number 847. The $3 million pink diamond. 60 minutes later, police officers stormed the lavish charity event where Cynthia was proudly displaying my ring, convinced she had merely taken a bauble of no consequence. My name is Dolores. I am 71 years young, and for the last 10 years, my role in this family has been the ghost in the corner, the inconvenient elder everyone tolerates at gatherings. To Cynthia, I was just the senile widow clinging to the property my late husband bequeathed me. She entered our lives 10 years ago when she married my boy Louis. From the very beginning, she made it clear I was an unwanted guest under my own roof. Cynthia is that particular type of person who operates with a sense of divine entitlement. Poised, cunning, always swathed in designer crimson and emerald gowns, dripping with the pricey gems my son purchased to maintain her contentment. The moment she crossed my threshold, she appointed me her unpaid domestic. Dolores, fetch my coffee. Dolores, press my evening gown. Dolores, must you stomp around? I have a migraine. Respect was a foreign concept. In her eyes, I was merely the elderly one, as if my name had been erased. At our family meals, she would discuss me like I was furniture. Louis, don't you think your mother would be happier in an assisted living facility? This place is far too much for a woman her age. And my son, my own flesh and blood, would just stare at his plate and murmur, Mom is comfortable here, Cynthia. But I felt the shift. Louis started watching me with a new, weary expression, as if I were an anchor holding him back. Cynthia had been methodically corrupting his perception, hissing in his ear that I was too aged to maintain such a large home, that they required the room for their own future. She fantasized about converting my parlor into her personal studio, about ripping out the garden my husband and I nurtured for 4 decades to install some sterile patio for entertaining. For years, I absorbed the degradation quietly. When company came, Cynthia would present me as Louis's mom, never as the matriarch of this house. When she threw her soirees, I was banished to my quarters because, in her words, the elderly make guests uneasy. There were countless evenings I wept without a sound, questioning how I had become a phantom in the sanctuary built with so much devotion. What Cynthia could never have suspected, what my entire family remains ignorant of, is that my departed husband, Mario, gifted me with far more than this dwelling. In our final years together, Mario had been quietly amassing a treasury of priceless art, jewels, and antiquities. He understood my discreet nature, that I would never parade our riches, and he trusted me to be the guardian of his legacy when he was gone. Concealed behind a portrait in my bedroom is a secure vault containing a trove valued at over $15 million. Among these treasures sat the ring Cynthia had just borrowed, a 5-carat pink diamond crafted by a legendary Parisian jeweler in the 1920s, appraised at $3 million. To an untrained eye, it appeared to be a simple, elegant heirloom. To a connoisseur, it was a magnum opus. Today, Cynthia was attending a critical charity ball, one of those opulent affairs where corporate spouses showcase their most extravagant outfits and vie for the title of most impressive adornments. For weeks, I'd endured her lamenting that she lacked the perfect accent for her gold gown. She had been obsessively flipping through jewelry magazines, sighing dramatically because her favorite items exceeded even Louis's generous allowance. This morning, while I tended to my roses, I observed her slipping into my bedroom uninvited. This was not her first unauthorized excursion through my possessions. But today felt different. I watched her lift the lid of my jewelry case, that modest wooden box where I store my less precious items, and her gaze locked onto the pink diamond ring. She plucked it out, held it to the light, and I witnessed that familiar, condescending smirk she wears when she believes she's found another resource to exploit. 1 hour later, that text message arrived. Just borrowed your vintage ring for the gala, Nana. Hope that's all right. She didn't possess the basic decency to request my consent. She simply helped herself, operating under the assumption that everything I owned was hers for the taking, that I was too ancient and irrelevant to own anything of actual worth. Reading those words, something fundamental within me shattered. For a decade, I had tolerated her scorn, her disdain, her vicious comments about my age and my supposed incompetence. But seizing my ring without asking, that ring, a crown jewel of Mario's private collection, was the final offense. I sat in my garden chair, staring at the message on my phone, and for the first time in years, a real, unforced smile spread across my face. Enjoy yourself, sweetheart, I replied. Then, without a second's delay, I called Frank, my most trusted confidant. Frank was Mario's closest friend, the sole person alive who knew the complete truth about our concealed fortune. Frank, I stated, my voice steadier than it had been in a decade. It's time. Initiate the contingency you and Mario prepared. Cynthia has taken catalog number 847. A pause hung on the line before I heard Frank's low chuckle. Dolores, are you 100% certain? Once we begin this process, there is no reversing it. I confirmed that yes, after 10 years of indignities, it was time for my daughter-in-law to discover precisely whom she had been mistreating. Frank outlined the procedure. For years, he had been meticulously recording every item in Mario's collection, formally registering them as high-value assets with unique catalog numbers. Every piece boasted authenticity papers, current valuations, and, most critically, comprehensive insurance policies. The ring now on Cynthia's finger was legally documented as item 847, worth $3 million. I'm contacting the insurance company now, Frank informed me. The protocol is explicit. When a registered asset is removed without the owner's consent, we are obligated to report it as stolen immediately. Within the half hour, police will possess a warrant to reclaim the property, regardless of its location. While Frank handled the necessary calls, I remained in my sitting room, remembering every instant Cynthia had made me feel like I didn't exist. The dinner she held for Lewis's associates where she instructed me to take my meal in the kitchen, claiming the dining table was full. Last Christmas, when she unwrapped lavish gifts from Lewis before handing me a discount store scarf with the words, "We got you something practical. At your stage in life, you don't need much." I recalled the afternoon her clique gathered for a book discussion. I was nestled in my favorite living room armchair with a novel when she entered and announced before the entire group, "Dolores, would you mind retiring to your room? We require solitude to converse about significant matters." Her companions observed me with sympathetic glances, as if I were a family pet that needed relocating. Yet the memory that inflicted the deepest wound was the discussion I'd accidentally overheard just last week. Cynthia was on the telephone with her sister, Gretchen, and I could hear every word from the corridor. "I swear, this old bat is pushing me over the edge," she complained. "She resides in this massive home like royalty, yet look at her attire. Look at her tacky jewelry. It's downright sad. Lewis and I are just waiting for her to choose a retirement home, but she's so obstinate. The day she finally goes, I'm renovating this entire property, beginning with hauling all her hideous old furniture to the dump." That conversation was the turning point. I realized then that I could no longer remain passive. Cynthia didn't just hold me in contempt. She held everything Mario and I had created in contempt. She had no clue that the hideous old furniture she loathed was worth more capital than she could spend in multiple lifetimes. Frank called again. "It's done, Dolores. The theft report is officially logged. The ring is classified as stolen goods valued at $3 million. I've provided the police with the hotel's address for the charity ball. They have instructions to retrieve the item on site." "And Cynthia?" I inquired. "What becomes of her?" Frank let out a breath. Dolores, in legal terms, this is grand larceny. We're discussing $3 million. The statute mandates she could be imprisoned for years, but you are the aggrieved party. The choice to pursue criminal charges or simply reclaim your property is yours. I told him I needed to consider it. In that moment, I just wanted to witness the look on Cynthia's face when she understood she had profoundly miscalculated the helpless old lady she held in such low regard. But the ring was merely the first thread to unravel. What the authorities were about to uncover went far beyond a single stolen jewel. My daughter-in-law was hiding a second, more dangerous life, and the evidence was about to shatter our family forever. 60 minutes after I set the wheels in motion, my phone screamed to life. It was Louis, and his voice was pure panic. Mom, what in God's name is happening? Cops just crashed Cynthia's event. They're accusing her of stealing a $3 million ring. This has to be some kind of insane mix-up. This is not a mix-up, son, I responded, my tone even. Your wife removed a highly valuable artifact from your father's private collection without consent. That ring's value is $3 million, and she had zero authorization to touch it. What collection? What are you talking about? Dad didn't own anything that valuable. Mom, you need to call the police right now and explain this is a huge misunderstanding. It was astounding. My own child was completely unaware of the wealth his father had secured. Mario had been exceptionally cautious, keeping his acquisitions and investments hidden, even from Louis. He aimed to shield our family from the perils of visible affluence, extortionists, swindlers, long-lost relatives emerging with open palms. Louis, I said, there are countless truths about your father and about me that you are unaware of. Your wife has committed a grave error, and she alone will bear the repercussions. Mom, have you lost your mind? Cynthia is hysterical. They're handcuffing her. Her friends are filming the whole thing. Her social standing is demolished. Her social standing? I echoed. What about the decade I've spent being treated like garbage in my own home? What about every public humiliation? What about that phone call where she told her sister I was a pathetic old woman? Louis went quiet. He knew precisely which call I referenced because he had overheard it, too, and had done nothing to stop it. Mom, I'm begging you, he finally whispered. Cynthia can be challenging, but she doesn't belong in jail over a confusion. It was not confusion, Louis. It was theft. And now your wife will learn that the woman she belittled is not the feeble senior she assumed. I ended the call and sat in the stillness, digesting the scene. My son, my only child, had stood by for 10 years, watching his wife degrade me and never once raised his voice in my defense. Now that reality had arrived, he expected me to rescue Cynthia from the consequences of her own hubris. But I would not. For the first time in 10 years, I refused to be the silent ghost who accepted everything. 20 minutes later, Frank appeared at my door with Patrick, a private investigator he'd collaborated with for decades. Patrick was a distinguished man in his 50s, sharp and methodical, with a focus on fraud and art crime. Dolores, Frank announced, Patrick has been conducting a discreet inquiry into Cynthia for the last 6 months. It began after you voiced your concerns about her behavior. I was taken aback. What concerns? I never said I was suspicious of Cynthia. Frank offered a knowing look. Recall our discussion in December? You mentioned several minor pieces seemed displaced, that your jewelry case appeared disturbed on multiple occasions. I did remember. I had blamed it on my own aging mind, the forgetfulness of my years. Those were not senior moments, Dolores. I took the initiative to investigate, and what Patrick found extends well beyond today's ring. Patrick opened a leather portfolio filled with photos and documents. Mrs. Dolores, your daughter-in-law has been liquidating items from your collection for nearly 2 years. Minor objects initially. An antique brooch, pearl studs, a silver chain. Things you might have assumed were misplaced or forgotten. My pulse quickened. We verified a minimum of 12 distinct transactions at pawnbrokers and antique dealers across the city. The cumulative worth of the stolen goods is approximately $45,000. I was speechless. Cynthia hadn't just insulted me and made me feel transparent. She had been robbing me for years. But how? I managed, my voice unsteady. How did she know what to take without me noticing? She's strategic, Patrick continued. She targeted only items you seldom wore or that were buried in your drawers. It seems she'd been conducting a mental inventory of your jewelry for years, pinpointing which pieces could vanish without immediate alarm. Furthermore, we have proof she's been photographing your valuable possessions, likely evaluating what else she could liquidate later. Frank added, Patrick secured audio of Cynthia in 3 separate pawn shops, clearly fabricating stories about the jewelry's origin. In one, she claims they were inherited from a late grandmother. In another, she states her husband gifted them, but she requires emergency cash for a medical procedure. A storm of rage and treachery boiled inside me. For 2 years, while I chastised myself for being scatterbrained, while I feared my mind was deteriorating, Cynthia had been methodically pilfering from me and spinning lies to pawn my belongings. Even worse, she had been preparing for a larger heist, secretly documenting my collection. There's additional information, said Patrick, flipping a page in the dossier. Her expenditure habits are incompatible with the official income she and your son declare. Over the past 24 months, Cynthia has acquired over $30,000 in apparel, financed costly spa treatments, luxury holidays, and is a regular at upscale dining establishments. When we cross-reference these costs with the funds from your sold jewelry, the figures align perfectly. So the money Cynthia used for those designer dresses in ruby and forest green, for those expensive purses she carried with such superiority, for those heels she used to walk all over my spirit, it all originated from the sale of my property. She had been financing her lavish existence by stealing from the very senile old woman she looked down upon. But wait, I said, a new coldness in my tone. If you've known about this for months, why keep me in the dark? Frank and Patrick exchanged a glance. Dolores, we required irrefutable evidence to construct a solid case. Furthermore, we needed to wait for her to commit an error of such magnitude that she couldn't talk her way out of it. Today's theft of the $3 million ring is that exact miscalculation. As if on cue, my phone chimed again. An unfamiliar number flashed, but I answered. Mrs. Dolores? A woman's voice, official and slightly strained. This is Detective Margaret Garcia with the Metropolitan Police Department. We're at the Plaza Hotel with your daughter-in-law, Cynthia. She is adamant that you permitted her to take the ring and insists this is a massive misunderstanding. Would you be willing to come to the hotel to help us clarify the situation? Detective Garcia, I replied, my voice like steel. My daughter-in-law took that ring without my authorization. I possess the text message where she explicitly admits to borrowing it without consulting me. Furthermore, that ring is appraised at $3 million and belongs to a legally registered collection. I understand, ma'am. However, your daughter-in-law is extremely distressed, and your son is also present, insisting there must be an error. He mentioned you live on a fixed income and have never displayed signs of possessing such valuable assets. I laughed, a sharp, dry sound that made both Frank and Patrick look up. Detective, my son is essentially claiming I am too impoverished or too simple-minded to own such jewelry. An uncomfortable silence filled the line. Well, ma'am, he did reference your modest pension. Detective Garcia, I cut in. I will arrive within the hour with my attorney and all documentation proving not only my ownership of the ring, but also that my daughter-in-law has been systematically stealing from me for years. I anticipate that upon my arrival, she will be formally detained, as is appropriate for someone who has stolen property valued in the millions. I ended the call and looked at my 2 allies. Gentlemen, I stated, it is time for Cynthia and my son to learn the true identity of the woman they've been underestimating. Frank gave a grim smile. Dolores, is there anything else we should be prepared for before we confront them at the hotel? Patrick learned that Cynthia has been consulting with an art evaluator named Mark, showing him photos of other pieces in your collection. It appears she was orchestrating a much more significant theft. Based on our intercepted communications, she believed she could get at least $200,000 for several of your paintings and sculptures. Patrick added, Mrs. Dolores, your daughter-in-law doesn't just view you as a useless elder. She sees you as an ATM she can withdraw from without any consequences. He paused for effect. In her own recorded words to that appraiser, she said, "The old bat doesn't even know what she's sitting on. I could take half her junk and she'd never know. She's too far gone to keep track of her own things." Those words were a physical blow. Cynthia hadn't just been robbing me, she had been mocking me, considering me too mentally deficient to protect what was mine. She had been planning to ransack my home, capitalizing on what she perceived as my declining faculties. "Frank," I said, rising from my chair with a resolve I hadn't felt in decades, "I want you to pursue every possible charge against Cynthia. Not just for the ring, but for every theft over the last 2 years. And I want my son, Louis, to understand completely the nature of the woman he married." "Are you absolutely certain, Dolores?" Frank's voice was grave. "Once we make this public, the entire family will learn about Mario's fortune and Cynthia's crimes. There will be no returning from this." I gazed through the window at the garden Mario and I had planted 40 years ago, the garden Cynthia wanted to pave over for a modern entertainment space. I thought of every slight, every moment of feeling invisible in my own home, every tear shed in the dark, wondering if I truly was as worthless as she made me feel. "Frank," I declared, "it is time for this senile old woman to teach them all a lesson they will never, ever forget." But the arrest at the gala was just the beginning. As the police dug deeper, they uncovered a secret life my daughter-in-law had been hiding right under our noses, one that would shock the entire city. When we arrived at the Plaza Hotel, the scene was pure chaos. Police cruisers, their lights painting the elegant facade in flashes of blue and red, blocked the entrance. Gawking guests in evening wear huddled on the sidewalk, smartphones held high, capturing every moment of the scandal. This was the kind of high society drama that would be the talk of the town for years. As I walked through the grand lobby, flanked by Frank and Patrick, I immediately spotted Cynthia. She was perched on a velvet sofa, surrounded by 3 stern-faced officers. For the first time in a decade, the picture of perfect composure was shattered. Her meticulously applied makeup was streaked with tears, her golden gown was crumpled, and her hands were secured in front of her with cold, steel handcuffs. My $3 million ring was notably absent from her finger. Louis was standing a few feet away, his face flushed with anger as he argued vehemently with a detective. When he saw me enter with my small entourage, his expression shifted from desperation to pure fury. He stormed over, and I could see in his eyes that he held me entirely responsible for this spectacle. "Mom, you need to fix this." "Now," he yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "Look at her. Cynthia is being humiliated in front of everyone. Her friends are live-streaming this. Her life is over. Her life." I repeated, keeping my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Louis, your wife stole a $3 million ring from me. This isn't a misunderstanding about a piece of costume jewelry. This is a felony." "But Mom, you never told us you had anything that valuable," he spluttered, his hands gesturing wildly. "If we had known, none of this would have happened." Cynthia thought it was just some old, worthless thing. Frank stepped forward, a formidable presence in his tailored suit. He handed Louis a thick, legal-sized folder. "Mr. Louis, these documents contain the certified appraisals, certificates of authenticity, and insurance policies for the ring. Your wife did not steal a trinket. She stole a historically significant piece of jewelry valued at $3 million. Louis fumbled with the folder, his eyes scanning the official documents. I watched as his face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally, dawning horror. This can't be real. Dad actually had all this? Why did you never tell me?" "Your father believed in privacy and protection," I explained calmly. "And judging by how your wife has been systematically looting my belongings for 2 years, it seems his instincts were correct." "Looting? What are you talking about now?" Patrick stepped forward and presented Louis with the damning file on Cynthia. The photographs of her entering and exiting pawn shops, the sales receipts, the transcripts of her lies, it was all laid bare. "Your wife, Mr. Louis," Patrick stated professionally, "has been selling your mother's possessions for the last 24 months. We have documented evidence of at least a dozen separate transactions, totaling approximately $45,000. Louis was rendered speechless. He leafed through the evidence, his hands trembling. I watched his world crumble in real time. The woman he had built a life with, the woman for whom he had allowed his mother to be mistreated, was a common thief who had been preying on his own family. At that moment, Detective Garcia approached us. She was a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. Mrs. Dolores, I need you to confirm a few details for the record. Did you, or did you not, give your daughter-in-law permission to take the ring in question? Absolutely not, I stated firmly. I have the text message right here where she admits to borrowing it without my knowledge. Where I come from, that is called theft. And can you confirm you are the legal owner of this ring? Frank intervened smoothly. Detective, all the legal documents are here. The ring was purchased by Mrs. Dolores's late husband. It is explicitly named in his will, insured for its full value and part of the official inheritance inventory. The detective reviewed the papers and gave a curt nod. Everything appears to be in order. Mrs. Dolores, do you wish to press formal criminal charges against your daughter-in-law? Before I could answer, Cynthia shrieked from her seat. Dolores, please. It was an honest mistake. You know I would never deliberately hurt you. I've always treated you with nothing but respect. I turned slowly and walked toward her. For 10 years, she had spoken to me with condescension and contempt. Now, her voice was laced with pure, undiluted desperation. For the first time, she needed me. Respect? I asked, stopping before her. You call a decade of humiliation respect? You call banishing me to the kitchen when you had company respect? You call stealing from me for 2 years and then suggesting I was losing my mind respect? Her eyes widened in panic. Steal from you? I never stole anything. This is the first time I've ever taken anything of yours. Patrick moved closer and showed her the photographs from the pawn shops. Mrs. Cynthia, we have visual and audio evidence of you selling your mother-in-law's property on 12 separate occasions over the past 2 years. Cynthia's face went as white as marble. She looked at the photos, then at me, then at Louis, searching for any lifeline. Those were just little things, she stammered, her voice breaking. I thought you didn't want them anymore. I didn't think you'd even notice. I thought you'd forgotten about them. And that gave you the right to take them? I asked, my voice cold. And to lie to the pawnbrokers, telling them they were heirlooms from your grandmother? Louis stared at her aghast. Cynthia, tell me you didn't. Tell me you didn't actually steal from my mother. Cynthia broke down into heaving sobs. Louis, you know how much we needed the extra money. You know your salary wasn't enough for the life we wanted to live. And she has so much stuff. I thought she would never miss a few small things. But they weren't yours to take. Louis shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. They were my mother's. And you made me believe she was getting senile when she couldn't find her things. The final piece clicked into place. Cynthia hadn't just been stealing from me, she had been actively manipulating Louis, using my genuine confusion over missing items as proof of mental decline. Every time I questioned a misplaced piece, she had whispered to him that it was just a normal part of aging. Detective Garcia, I said, feeling a powerful, serene certainty settle over me. I wish to press every possible charge against my daughter-in-law. Not only for the ring she stole today, but for every single theft she has committed over the past 2 years. No, Cynthia cried, her body slumping. Please, Dolores. I'll give you everything back. I'll pay you back. Don't do this to me. I looked directly into her eyes, the eyes that had looked through me for so long. Cynthia, for 10 years, you made me feel invisible. You humiliated me in front of my own guests. You made me feel like a burden in the home I built with my husband. For 2 years, you stole from me while making me doubt my own sanity. And now that you are facing the consequences, you ask me for mercy. I never thought it was a big deal. I never knew you had such valuable things. If you had known they were valuable, I let the question hang in the air for a moment. What, you would have stolen more? Cynthia, the problem isn't that you didn't know the price tag. The problem is that you felt entitled to take what wasn't yours. The problem is that for a decade, you treated me like I was nothing. Frank addressed the detective. Detective, We will also be filing formal charges for the other documented thefts. We have more than enough evidence to prosecute. The detective nodded. Understood. Mrs. Cynthia, you are under arrest for grand larceny in the first degree, multiple counts of petty theft and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As Detective Garcia recited the Miranda rights, I looked at my son. He stood frozen, watching his wife being formally arrested, finally comprehending that the woman he loved was a criminal who had been exploiting his mother for years. Mom, he said, his voice hollow. I didn't know. You have to believe me. Louis, I replied, perhaps you didn't know about the thefts. But you knew how she treated me. You witnessed every snide remark, every humiliation, every time she made me feel unwelcome in my own home. And you said nothing. Louis hung his head, unable to meet my gaze. He knew I was right. For 10 years, he had been a silent accomplice, choosing peace with his wife over defending his own mother. Now that the veil had been torn away, he was finally understanding the cost of his silence. Mom, he mumbled, I thought if I didn't rock the boat, you two would eventually work it out. Things don't just work out, Louis, I said, especially when one person is systematically abusing another. Your wife didn't just disrespect me for a decade. She stole from me, she manipulated you, and she was planning to steal even more. And you thought that would just resolve itself. As I spoke, I could see more guests recording the scene. The story was spreading like wildfire. For Cynthia, who had built her entire identity on her social status and impeccable image, this public downfall was a punishment far beyond any jail sentence. Detective Garcia finished reading Cynthia her rights and began to lead her away. But before they reached the lobby doors, Cynthia twisted around, her face contorted with a venom I had never seen before. Dolores, you have no idea what you've just done, she screamed, her voice echoing through the space. My life is ruined. My friends, my reputation, everything is destroyed. And for what? For a stupid ring you never even wore. No, I replied, my voice still calm amidst her storm. For 10 years of theft, humiliation, and abuse. The ring was simply the final straw. I gave you a family, she continued to shriek, struggling against the detective's grip. I gave you grandchildren you never had. Louis, and I gave you a purpose in your old age. The absurdity of her statement almost made me laugh. Cynthia, you didn't give me a family. You turned my family into a group of strangers who saw me as a nuisance. And as for grandchildren, you and Louis decided not to have children, remember? You said they would ruin your figure and your career. Louis looked more horrified with every word that spilled from her mouth. I believe he was finally seeing the true Cynthia, manipulative, selfish, and utterly unrepentant when cornered. Dolores, she yelled as the detective pulled her toward the door. If you do this, you'll lose your son forever. Louis will never forgive you for destroying his marriage. I turned to Louis. He was standing there, watching his wife threaten his mother while in custody for stealing from her. Louis, I asked, is that true? Do you believe I am destroying your marriage? Louis was silent for a long, heavy moment, processing the mountain of evidence and the ugly truth of his wife's character. No, Mom, he finally said, his voice low but clear. My marriage was destroyed the first time Cynthia decided to steal from you. I just didn't know it until tonight. Cynthia looked utterly defeated. Her last desperate ploy had failed. She had always been able to rely on Louis taking her side, but the evidence was too overwhelming, her lies too transparent. As Cynthia was finally led away, Patrick handed me another, thinner folder. Mrs. Dolores, there's something else you need to be aware of. During our investigation, we discovered that Cynthia had been in contact with a lawyer who specializes in elder law and contested wills. Louis, who had been sinking into a chair, looked up sickened. What does that mean? It means, Frank explained grimly, that your wife wasn't just stealing from your mother in the present. She was planning for the future, investigating how to gain control of the entire inheritance when your mother passed away. Patrick added, we found emails between Cynthia and this attorney discussing the possibility of having your mother declared mentally incompetent. The plan was to demonstrate that she had senile dementia and therefore lacked the legal capacity to manage her own finances or property. A cold dread washed over me. She wasn't just a thief, she was a predator. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent? Yes, Patrick confirmed. In one email, Cynthia specifically mentions that your mother had been frequently misplacing items, which could be used as evidence of mental decline. Of course, we now know you weren't misplacing things. She was stealing them. Louis dropped his head into his hands. My God, he moaned. She was planning to take everything from you. Not only that, Frank added, we also found that she had been pressuring Louis to convince you to move to a retirement home. Once you were institutionalized, it would have been significantly easier to get a court order declaring you incompetent. I remembered all the times she had gently, persistently suggested that I was too old to live alone, that I needed professional care, that I'd be happier in a community. It was never about my well-being. It was a calculated, cold-blooded strategy to seize my fortune. Mrs. Dolores, Patrick said, your daughter-in-law is far more dangerous than we initially thought. We're not dealing with a woman who impulsively took some jewelry. We're dealing with someone who developed a long-term plan to steal your entire inheritance and have you declared mentally unfit to legally justify it. Louis lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed. Mom, I never suspected any of this. When Cynthia talked about the retirement home, I thought it was because she was genuinely worried about you. Louis, I said, sitting beside him, your wife manipulated you as much as she manipulated me. She knew exactly what to say to make her malicious intentions sound like compassionate concern. Frank closed his folder with a definitive snap. Dolores, with all this evidence, the district attorney will likely offer Cynthia a plea deal. Depending on how we proceed, she could face between 5 and 15 years in prison. And the money she already stole? I asked. Most of the items she sold were purchased by private collectors, Patrick explained. We should be able to track down and recover about 60% of their value. The rest was likely spent on her lavish lifestyle. Louis let out a shuddering sigh. Mom, what happens now? What happens to me? What happens to our family? It was the question that had been hanging in the air since this nightmare began. In the span of a few hours, our family had been irrevocably shattered. My daughter-in-law was facing a long prison sentence. My son was realizing he had been married to a criminal who plotted against his mother. And I, the invisible old woman, was now the central figure in a legal and personal maelstrom. Louis, I said, placing a hand on his arm. What happens now is that you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. For 10 years, you were a silent bystander while your wife mistreated me. Now you know the truth about who she really is. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Mom, I want to make this right with you. I want to make up for all the years I didn't stand up for you. Making it right isn't about the money, Louis. It's about respect. It's about never again allowing anyone to make me feel invisible in my own home. He nodded, a tear finally escaping down his cheek. I can stay with you tonight. I don't think I can be alone in that house after all this. For the first time in 10 years, my son was asking me for shelter instead of demanding I accommodate his wife. It was a small step, but a significant one. Of course you can stay, Louis, I said. But tomorrow, we need to have a serious conversation about how we rebuild our relationship from here. As we left the hotel, I could see the news vans already arriving. The story was breaking. By morning, the entire city would know that Dolores, the woman they had all overlooked, was a force to be reckoned with. Just when I thought the nightmare was over, my lawyer received a call that would turn our world upside down again. The police had found something in my own basement, a secret that proved my daughter-in-law's crimes were bigger than anyone could have imagined. Just when I thought the nightmare was over, my lawyer received a call that would turn our world upside down again. The police had found something in my own basement, a secret that proved my daughter-in-law's crimes were bigger than anyone could have imagined. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a different person. For the first time in a decade, I rose in my own home without feeling like an intruder. Louis had slept in his old childhood room, and when I came down for breakfast, I found him in the kitchen, nervously making coffee. It was a small gesture, but monumental. For the first time, someone was serving me in my own kitchen. "Good morning, Mom," he said, and his voice held a new tone, respect, and a silent, profound apology. "Good morning, son." I sat at the table where I'd shared 40 years of breakfasts with Mario, the same table where Cynthia had made me feel like an unwelcome guest for so long. Louis set a cup of coffee in front of me and sat down. "Mom, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Cynthia was cruel to you, and I did nothing. I was remembering all the times you said you couldn't find something, and I thought it was just your memory." "Louis," I interrupted softly, "you don't need to punish yourself for being manipulated. Cynthia is very clever. She knew exactly how to frame things to make her abuse look like concern." "But I'm your son," he insisted, his voice thick with guilt. "I should have been on your side. I should have seen the signs." As we spoke, the phone rang. It was Frank, and his voice was urgent. "Dolores, I have significant news. The district attorney wants to meet with us this morning. It appears Cynthia's case is much larger than we initially believed." "Larger how?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. "They executed a search warrant on your home last night while we were at the hotel." "My home?" "They searched my house." "Dolores," Frank's tone was grave. "They found a hidden room in the basement. A room your daughter-in-law had been using. She wasn't just stealing from you. She's been running an antique theft and resale operation that victimizes several wealthy families across the city." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "What are you saying?" "They found over 50 pieces of art and jewelry that don't belong to her or Louis. It seems she used her access to high society events to identify targets, then orchestrated more complex thefts. Your home wasn't just one of her targets, Dolores. It was her base of operations." Louis, who was listening to my side of the conversation, turned pale. "Are you saying our house has been the center of a criminal enterprise for years?" Frank continued, his voice tight. "There's more. They found correspondence showing Cynthia had been selling information to professional thieves, house plans, family schedules, security system details. The FBI is now involved because the operation crosses state lines." I couldn't process it. The woman who had eaten at my table, slept under my roof, had not only been stealing from me, but had been running a criminal network from my own home. "Frank, what does this mean for Louis? Could he be implicated?" "The FBI will want to question him, of course, but so far, all evidence suggests Louis was completely unaware. She was very careful to keep him in the dark." After hanging up, Louis and I sat in stunned silence. My home, the sanctuary Mario and I built with so much love, had been violated in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. "Mom," Louis finally whispered, "how could I be married to a criminal for 10 years and not have a clue?" "Because she wanted you in the dark," I replied. "Louis, people like Cynthia are experts at compartmentalizing their lives. To you, she was the elegant wife. To me, she was the tormentor. To her victims, she was the mastermind. She kept every part of her life meticulously separate." An hour later, Frank arrived with 2 FBI agents, Agent Karen Brooks and Agent Michael Smith. They explained that Cynthia's case was now part of a federal investigation into a multi-state art and antique theft ring. "Mrs. Dolores," Agent Brooks began, "we believe your daughter-in-law used your residence as a command center for at least 3 years. We've identified connections to thefts in 6 different states." Agent Smith added, "Her method was sophisticated. Instead of random burglaries, she cultivated social relationships with wealthy families, studied their homes during parties, and sold that intelligence to professional crews." "But how did she keep this all secret?" Louis asked, his voice trembling. "Your wife is highly intelligent," Agent Brooks explained. "She never participated in the physical break-ins. Her role was as an information broker and a planner." Agent Smith showed us a folder of photographs. We found hundreds of photos she took secretly at social events. Pictures of paintings, sculptures, jewelry other women were wearing, even close-ups of alarm panels and floor plans. I recognized many of the homes, families I knew, women I'd spoken with at charity events for years. "Agent Brooks," I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "does this mean other families were victimized by Cynthia?" "At least 12 that we've identified so far." The total value of the thefts we've connected to her network exceeds $2 million. Lewis looked utterly shattered. Agent Smith, what's going to happen to me? Will I be considered an accomplice? Mr. Lewis, we've reviewed your financials, your communications, your travel records. There is no evidence you had any knowledge of or participation in your wife's criminal activities. However, we will need your full cooperation. Agent Brooks looked directly at me. Mrs. Dolores, there's one more thing. When we arrested Cynthia, she immediately began to negotiate. She's offering to give up her entire criminal network in exchange for a reduced sentence. What kind of information? I asked. Names of all her accomplices, details on unsolved thefts, locations of hidden stolen property. She's willing to turn on everyone to avoid a 20-year sentence. Frank leaned forward. And what does that mean for Dolores? How long could Cynthia serve if she cooperates? If her testimony leads to solving all connected cases and the arrest of the network's other members, she could face 5 to 8 years instead of 20 to 25. Lewis sighed deeply. So even now, after being caught, she's manipulating the system to save herself. That's how intelligent criminals operate, Mr. Lewis, Agent Smith said. They always have an exit strategy. After the FBI agents left, I sat in my living room, trying to absorb it all. My house had been the headquarters of a criminal operation. The woman who made me feel invisible had been using my home to plot crimes against families just like mine. Mom, Lewis said, sitting beside me, how do we come back from this? How do I rebuild my life after finding out I was married to a crime boss? Lewis, I said, looking at my son, this 40-year-old man who suddenly seemed like a lost boy, you do what I'm going to do. You decide that you will not let Cynthia define the rest of your life. She lied to you. She stole from me. She used our family. But now that we know the truth, we have the power to decide what to do with it. And what do you want to do, Mom? I smiled, feeling a strength I hadn't known in years. I'm going to show the world exactly who Dolores is. And I'm going to make sure no other family has to go through what we did. The following days were a whirlwind. Frank organized a press conference. For the first time in 10 years, I would be the center of attention for the right reasons. The morning of the conference, I dressed in my finest emerald green dress, the one I'd never worn because of Cynthia's sneers. I put on jewelry from my collection that she hadn't managed to steal, and I felt, for the first time in a decade, like the powerful, elegant woman I truly was. Lewis helped me to the venue. Mom, he said as we walked in, I'm proud of you. I know this is terrible, but how you're handling it. Dad would be proud, too. The room was packed with journalists and cameras. When I entered, all eyes turned to me. But this time, they weren't looks of pity. They were looks of respect, curiosity, and admiration. Frank spoke first, then introduced me. As I approached the microphone, I felt a profound calm. My name is Dolores, I began. And for the past 10 years, I was a victim of psychological abuse and systematic theft by my daughter-in-law, Cynthia. But this is not just my story. It is the story of many seniors who are victimized by family members who see them as easy targets. I told my story not as a victim, but as a woman who had resisted, who had kept her secrets until the right moment, and who had fought for justice. Cynthia thought I was a senile old woman who would never notice her crimes, I said. But she didn't know that my late husband taught me to be observant, patient, and strategic. When I suspected something was wrong, I didn't confront her. I investigated, I gathered evidence, and I waited for the perfect moment to act. A journalist asked why I waited so long. Because I needed irrefutable proof, I replied. People like my daughter-in-law are experts at playing the victim. If I had acted too soon, she would have convinced everyone I was a confused old woman making up stories. Another asked how I felt knowing my home was a criminal command center. I feel betrayed, of course. But I also feel empowered. Because in the end, it was I who ended that operation. It was my report that led to the arrests. It was my evidence that unmasked the entire network. After the conference, my phone exploded. Calls from national media, documentary producers, and most importantly, from other elderly people who saw their own struggles in my story. A woman named Grace called, crying. Dolores, I saw your interview. I think my son-in-law is stealing from me. My jewelry is gone, but my daughter says I'm just forgetful. After hearing you, I think maybe I'm not losing my mind. These calls made me understand my pain had a purpose. My experience could protect others. That night, Louis and I had our difficult conversation. Mom, he said, I've decided to divorce Cynthia. I can't stay married to someone who hurt you so deeply and who is a criminal. Are you sure, son? That's a monumental decision. Completely sure. For 10 years, I chose Cynthia over you, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I won't make it again. 3 days later, I got a call from a television producer named Peter. Mrs. Dolores, have you considered having your own show? A program where you help other seniors who might be in situations like yours. The idea was electrifying. For 71 years, I had been the wife, the mother, the invisible mother-in-law. Now, I was being offered a platform to be a voice, an advocate. Peter, I said, I'm interested. But I have conditions. That night, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on the transformation. A week ago, I was the invisible old woman. Now, I was a public figure whose story was inspiring hundreds. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Dolores, FBI update. Thanks to your case, they've arrested 6 more members of the network. Your bravery saved many other families. I smiled as I turned off the light. Cynthia had tried to steal my worth and dignity. But in the end, it was that very experience that gave me a purpose greater than I'd ever imagined. Just as I was starting my new life, I received a call from a place I never expected. It was Cynthia, calling from prison, and what she told me would change everything I thought I knew about her and about forgiveness. 1 year after Cynthia's arrest, my life was unrecognizable. Dolores's Wisdom was a hit television show, broadcast in over 30 countries. The Dolores Foundation started with an initial donation of $200,000 from my secret inheritance, had helped over 1,000 families. The irony was not lost on me. The money Cynthia wanted to steal was now protecting people from predators like her. But the most important change was personal. This morning, as I watered the garden Mario and I planted, Louis arrived with a woman I'd never seen before. She had warm brown hair and a genuine smile that reminded me of my husband. Mom, Louis said, nervous but happy. I want you to meet someone special. This is Nicole. We've been dating for 6 months. Nicole stepped forward with confidence and respect. Mrs. Dolores, I've heard so much about you. Louis says you're an inspiration. The first thing I noticed was how she looked at me, not through me. She spoke to me directly, not to Louis about me. Nicole, I said, what are your thoughts on my son dating while he's still technically married? Louis winced, but Nicole smiled. Mrs. Dolores, I appreciate your directness. Louis was very clear about the situation. The divorce was finalized last week. I would never date a married man. I liked her honesty. And what about having a famous mother-in-law who talks about family problems on television? She laughed. Honestly, I'm proud. You took a terrible experience and turned it into something that helps thousands of people. That takes incredible strength. Over the following months, I watched their relationship blossom. It was the opposite of his marriage to Cynthia. Nicole encouraged Louis to spend time with me, to include me, to value my opinion. When they hosted dinners, I was the guest of honor, not a burden. One afternoon, as we cooked together, Nicole asked me a surprising question. Mrs. Dolores, what can I do to make sure I never become like Cynthia? I paused, touched by her sincerity. Nicole, Cynthia saw our family as something to exploit, not contribute to. You're already different because you care enough to ask. But to be specific, never isolate Louis from his family. Never speak ill of me behind my back. Never assume my age makes my opinions irrelevant. And if you have a problem with me, talk to me directly. She nodded seriously. And what can I do to be a good daughter-in-law? Respect that this family has a history that existed before you. Honor that history while helping to create a new one. And never forget that family is about giving as much as you receive. 6 months later, Louis asked me to help him buy an engagement ring for Nicole. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. It had all started with a stolen ring, and now I was helping my son choose a symbol of true love. Mom, he said, looking at diamonds, Do you think I'm making the right choice? Can Nicole and I build something real after everything with Cynthia? Louis, the difference is that Nicole sees our family as something precious to protect. Cynthia saw it as something to exploit. That difference changes everything. The proposal was perfect. Louis organized a dinner in our garden, the one Cynthia had wanted to destroy. This time, I sat at the head of the table as the matriarch. When Nicole said yes, her first act was to walk over and hug me. "Mrs. Dolores," she said, tears in her eyes, "I hope I can be the daughter-in-law you deserve." "Nicole," I replied, hugging her back, "you already are." The wedding day was the happiest celebration our family had known in over a decade. Nicole insisted on having the ceremony in our garden, honoring the legacy Mario and I built. During the ceremony, Louis asked me to speak. 2 years ago, I thought my family's story had ended in betrayal. But today, I understand that chapter was just an ending, not the end of the book. Nicole, welcome to a family that now knows how to value respect, honesty, and genuine love. After the wedding, as guests celebrated, I received a text from a woman named Karen. "Dolores, your story gave me the courage to report my son who is stealing my medication. Thanks to you, I regained my dignity and my health. My son is now in rehab and our relationship is healing. Your courage inspired mine." These messages had become regular. My pain had been transformed into a lifeline for others. That night, as I sat alone in my garden, my phone rang one last time. It was Frank. "Dolores, final news on Cynthia. Her appeal was rejected. She'll serve the full 12 years. And how do I feel about that?" I asked myself aloud. "Only you can answer that, Dolores." The truth was, I no longer felt anger toward Cynthia. I felt pity. She had the chance to be part of a real family and squandered it for greed and envy. She would spend 12 years in prison, while I enjoyed the new life I built with my own courage and strength. "Frank," I said, "Cynthia is no longer part of my story. My story is about the families we've helped, the new relationship I have with Louis, the wonderful daughter-in-law I now have, and the legacy I'm building." After hanging up, I looked at the stars and whispered, "Mario, I hope you're proud of me." The invisible old woman who almost lost everything had finally found her voice, her power, and her purpose. The sweetest revenge wasn't destroying Cynthia. It was rebuilding myself. And as for the future, it was brighter than I ever could have imagined.